In this video, we're going to learn some basics in Microsoft Excel. And let's go ahead and start by changing the name of our tab here at the bottom of our screen to just height. And then before we do anything else, let's make sure we have our data turned on, so our data analysis pack. So we'll go to File and down to Options. And then we're going to go to Add-ins and go down here to Manage Excel Add-ins and hit Go. And make sure that Analysis Tool Pack is checked and then hit OK. And you know you did it right if you go to Data and then over here you see Data Analysis and you open it up and these options are here. This Analysis tab in your ribbon should exist now. But from here, let's go ahead and start working on our Excel sheet. And let's start by going here to our A1 tab and just giving our whole Excel sheet a name. Let's call it Statistical Analysis with Excel. So statistical analysis with Excel. Let's do our best to spell it correctly. And then in A2, let's just go ahead and write our name. So you'll write your name, I'll write my name. And then below that, let's go ahead and just write height of students. And then let's skip a line. Let's go down to A5, and then here we'll just write feet. And we can go over to B5 and let's write out and inches. And you can see that it's a little bit bigger than our column, so to widen this, let's click on B and let's just go ahead and widen that out just a little bit, as much as necessary. And then after that, we can go to C, and let's just write just inches in this tab, or in this cell here. And then we can widen our C tab as well. And then in D, let's go ahead and label this one decimal feet. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in my cells here. Your cells are going to be different because you have different measurements that you got in your individual classroom. So yours aren't going to be the exact same as mine. Mine are 5 foot 8 inches, and then 5 foot 4 inches, and 5 foot 9 inches. And the order doesn't really matter, as you'll see. But these are the measurements that I'm going to use for my demonstration. You will not have these numbers in here. You're going to go ahead and plug in the numbers that you got while measuring your classmates' feet and inches. And so then I got 6 foot 2 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here so you don't have to watch me type in my values. And you can go ahead and pause the video and go ahead and type in all of your values. And so you should have more measurements than me, but that won't really matter either. As you'll see, it's not going to add more work to what you need to do. It will just give you a better demonstration of all your statistics that you need to find for all these numbers. And again, I can't stress this enough, your values will not be the same as my values. But once you've got them all typed in, let's go ahead and convert these into just inches. And so to do that, let's click on our first column. It should be C6 right below just inches. And let's type in equals. And what I want to type is equals, and then I want to use my A6 cell here. So I'm going to type A6. And you can see it should highlight it blue. And I'm going to say A6 times 12 to convert that feet into inches. And then I want to add that to my inches here in B6. So I'm going to type plus B6. And I'm going to hit enter. And you'll see it'll go ahead and convert that into what the inches would be. It says A6 times 12 plus B6. And then you can see what that value is. And so then I can do the same thing in the second column. I can type equals A7. And then I'll type, okay, times 12 to convert that feet into inches, and then I'll add that to the inches there, adding to this value, which is 4 in this case. So I'm going to type B7, and then I'm going to hit enter again. And you might think to yourself, well, that's great that you can type that in, you can get the equation, but I could have done this faster in my head. What would be the point of this? Well, what's really cool is once I've typed in the equation once, I can go ahead and click on that cell where I typed in the equation, and I can hit Control C on my keyboard. And now I've copied the formula, and I go down to the next cell and I hit Control V on my keyboard, and it goes ahead and it types in the formula again for me, but it actually changes it. So if you look, This one is A7 times 12 plus B7, but I copied and pasted it and automatically changed it since I'm in the 8th row now. It automatically changed it to A8 times 12 plus B8. So we can do that again. We can go or click on the cell, hit Control C, go down and hit Control V, and automatically changes it to the ninth column, I'm sorry, the ninth row, because we're in the ninth row. Now, when you're hitting Control C and then down Control V, you need to be very careful not to accidentally hit Control and down, because what happens is you go to the bottom of your screen, and we don't want that to happen. If it does accidentally happen, you don't have to sit here and scroll all the way back up. Just hit Control up, and you go back up to the top of the screen to the last one you were at, and then no harm, no foul. But another cool thing about this is if I hit Control C, I don't have to, do it one at a time. What I can do is now highlight every column that I want the formula to be used in all the way to the bottom. And now I'm going to hit Control V, and it automatically puts that formula in for me in all those places. So you can see my 17th row, my row 17 says A17 times 12 plus B17. It automatically corrects the formula based on the row that I want the formula in. And now that I've converted these into inches, I can convert them back into just decimal feet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my D column at D6, and I'm going to type in equals to say I want an equation, and I'm going to go ahead and use my C6 cell, so C6, and I'm going to divide that inches by 12 to convert it into feet, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on my keyboard, and you can see I now have it in decimal feet. 5 feet 8 inches is about 5.6667, or 5 2/3 feet. And then we can do the same thing in D7. We can type in equals and say, okay, this time I want C7 divided by 12 and convert that into feet as well. Or I could just, of course, hit Control C on that column, on that formula that I had, and highlight all of them and hit Control V on my keyboard. And it'll convert all of these inch measurements into decimal feet. And then what I can go ahead and do is go ahead and make these numbers look a little bit more presentable, a little bit more readable. So I'm going to highlight all of them and right click and go down to Format Cells. And then I'm going to click on Number here. And I can change the decimal places. So I don't want 1 decimal place, I don't want 3 decimal places. I'm going to go ahead and make it all of these numbers here 2 decimal places by selecting 2 and hitting OK, and you can see it converts them all into 2 decimal places. And you might be thinking to yourself, okay, that's really cool. You can use equations to convert these measurements, but what else can you do? How else can you use Excel as a calculator? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and skip a line below my lowest feet measurement. So for me, my lowest decimal feet cell is right here at, what, D17. Yours should be much lower, way down here. But I'm going to skip a line, and I'm going to go ahead and type equals and then the term sum. And what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to hit parentheses, and it wants to know what numbers would you like to add up, because that's what sum means, is add. So what numbers would I like to add up? Well, I'm going to click and drag all of my decimal feet measurements. And so you can see it says D6 colon D17, and what that means is measure, or go ahead and add up all the numbers in between those 2 cells. And then I'm going to go ahead and close my parentheses and hit enter. And what we end up with is, okay, these add up to 68 feet. And what's really cool is you can go back and you can change measurements over here. Maybe you made a mistake, or maybe just want to change a value just to play around with the numbers, what happens if you change your numbers. But if I change this 5 feet 8 inches into 5 feet 6 inches, or I change this 5 foot 4 inches into 5 foot 11 inches, you can see how it updates my numbers here. And so any numbers based on this column went ahead and changed, and all of these were based on all of these. And so when I changed this to 11, it changed the decimal feet version, and since this number right here was based on that decimal foot number, when it added up, it went ahead and changed this number as well. And we can go ahead and do some other cool things with this sum. So let's go ahead and right click on it and go to Format Cells. Let's change this one to 3 decimals just to make it a little bit more precise. As you can see, it wasn't exactly 68.42. And then we can go to the left here, and we can actually go ahead and label, since we're not using the cell to the left here, we can label it and say, okay, sum. And okay, we can say actually sum equals and say, okay, the sum equals this number just for labeling purposes. And I can actually click on this again, and I'm going to go up here to my home ribbon, and I'm going to click on this align right, and that moves it over to the right. And then I can actually click on this one over here, this 68, this sum, and move it to the left. Yours won't be 68 most likely, but I can go ahead and move my sum to the left so it looks nice, and it says this sum equals this number, and it's just a little label for yourself. And actually I can go ahead and label this sum and give it a better name. I could say sum of decimal feet, and then hit enter, and it says, okay, sum of decimal feet is equal to 68.417. And what if I don't like the fact that this is right here in this column? What if I wanted to move it over to the side? So what I can do is I can click on these two columns that I've typed in these two values, or this description and value, and I can hit, instead of Control C, I can hit Control X on my keyboard. And what that does is it copies it, but it also cuts it. And so what I'm going to do now is put it in this column here. So I want to move this column where it says sum of decimal feet, I want to move it one column over. So I'm actually going to click right here at 68.417, and now I'm going to hit Control V, and you'll notice it moves both of them over. It didn't copy it, it cut it out and then repasted it to the side. And that's just a cool little trick you can do if you want to make it look nicer. If you put a value or some description in a place and then you decide you wanted it somewhere else. So go ahead and give that a try and see if you can do that yourself. Just move it around a little bit. But from there, let's go ahead and start playing around with the statistics that we can do with Excel. And I'm going to go ahead and go to our G6 cell here. And I'm going to type in mean, and then I'm going to go down and type in mode. I'm just going to type in my different statistics values, or my different statistics measurements. And so we'll say median as well. And then I can skip a line and I'll type in standard deviation. And I'll make a note for myself that the standard deviation is for the population. And then I'll go down one and type in standard deviation for the sample, and you notice it automatically fills in, which is kind of nice. I can hit enter and then double click on the cell again and then edit it and change just that one letter to an S. And so let me actually go ahead and repeat that in case you missed it. I'm going to go and delete it and retype it again. Click, type in standard deviation, and again you can see it automatically fills it in for me. It's because I've already used that name in a different cell. I hit enter, and then I can double click on this G11 tab and change that P into an S. And it's just a quick way to type, just a quick little trick that you can do in Excel. But then below that, let's skip a line and let's type in a minimum value, and then skip a line and let's type in a maximum value. And then one more time, skip a line, and let's type in range. And you might notice that the standard deviation is crossing over this or into the next cell, and so is minimum and maximum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and highlight all these values, and I'm going to align them to the right, which moves them over, and then I can play around with it. I'm going to click on the F column. I'm going to drag that one a little bit wider, which makes it where the standard deviation isn't crossing into the E tab. And you might say, well, I don't want it in the F tab either. Let me make the G wider if you want to, but you don't have to do that. And so if you want to undo something, all you have to do is just, well, you could hit the undo button here, redo and undo, or you could just type in Control Z on your keyboard. So let me show you that. We hit just Control and Z on my keyboard. You can see it undoes whatever the last thing I did was. Just some cool little facts for you, some little pieces of knowledge to help you use this software more efficiently. But let's go ahead and type in our statistics data that we have from our numbers here. And so to do that, we'll start with mean. So what I'm going to do is here in this H6 column, I'm going to type equals. And then what do I want it to equal? Well, I'm going to go over here to this functions tab and go down to average. And if you don't know that mean is average yet, it's something, I mean, you don't type in mean, you type average in Excel, and that's just something you'll have to learn as you use Excel more, but hopefully it'll become more and more obvious as you use Excel more and more. But it wants to know what input values we want to use to get our average. And so what's really cool is all I have to do is click this number and then highlight the numbers that I want to be my average. And so I want D6 to D17. Your column is probably a little bit longer from D6 to D17. It might be D6 to D30 or something like that. But go ahead and select all of your values and hit OK. And you'll notice that it automatically gives me the average. It automatically calculates it for me. And you don't have to select it over here whenever you type it in. Instead, we could type it equals and start typing in what we think it'll be. What do we think the term is going to be? So I'm going to try typing in mode, and you'll notice there's a couple of different mode options. I'm going to go ahead and see, well, I'm going to use mode multi. And so how do I type that? Well, I'm going to keep typing what I see, mode, and I'm going to write period, multi, or just looks like it's just mult for me. And I'm going to open a parentheses so I can use my values. And again, I'm just going to highlight these values and type them in. And you can see it says D6 to D17 again. Again, yours will be a little bit more, but that's okay. From here, I'm just going to close my parentheses and hit enter. And you can see it automatically found my mode for me. And that makes sense because, yes, there are two 5.5s, and it doesn't look like there's two of anything else here. So, yes, that would be my mode. And what about median? Well, this time I'm going to find it a little bit differently just to show you that there's more than one way to find it. Instead of instead of starting to type it in, or instead of finding it in here, what we can do is, if you don't see it here, which you do, but just in case you didn't, we could go to more functions and find it in here. And this has all of the functions that you could possibly need, and they're in alphabetical order, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to go ahead and find my M's here. And it looks like I'm at MO, so I'm going to scroll just a little bit until I find median, and then click on it and hit OK, and then it's saying, okay, we want the median. Now it says, well, what are your input numbers? And I'm going to go ahead and select the same values again, my decimal feet, and hit OK, and you can see that types it in that way as well. So these are just different ways that you can enter in your data if you want to. You get to choose whichever one you want. And so let's go down to standard deviation, and let's keep on practicing these ways to enter it in. So I'm going to hit equals, and I'm going to start typing in standard deviation, and it looks like whenever I got to it or typed in the A, it went to standardized. So let's try deleting and see. And I can see that I have a standard deviation population option and a standard deviation sample option. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to write standard dev period, that's a comma, period, P, and then open my parentheses. And this time, instead of highlighting the values, I'm going to go ahead and just show you that you don't have to. You could just type in the beginning value, which in this case is D6. So I'm going to type in D6, and you can see it automatically highlights that value. And then I'm going to hit colon, so shift colon, and type in the last value for myself. And in this case, for me, it's D17. So then I'll type in D17, and you can see it automatically highlights all of those values for me in between those. And so you could highlight them, or you could type them. Why would you type them? Well, maybe it's a little bit faster. Maybe you've memorized the numbers, or maybe you just prefer to type. I don't know. But the point is, you recognize that it is an option. And then I'm going to go ahead and close my parentheses, and you can see it works the exact same. And so for standard deviation sample, I'm going to go ahead and again type in ST. I'm sorry, well, you got to make sure you hit the equal sign, or else it won't give you an equation option. And so we say equals ST, and I'm going to do standard deviation period sample this time, and open my parentheses. And again, you can type the two values that you want to measure in between, or you can highlight it, which is kind of nice. And you might be wondering to yourself, why would we do both standard deviations? And in reality, you probably wouldn't. It's probably not necessary to do both. It's usually either going to be a sample or a population, but this is to demonstrate that you can do both within Excel. But from there, let's go ahead and find our minimum and maximum values. So we'll go ahead and type in equals, and let's just try typing in minimum and see what comes up. And you can see, well, minimum looks like it's the first option, so I'm just going to end it there and type parentheses, and it wants to know what values, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight them again and then close the parentheses, and it goes ahead and gives me the minimum value. You might be thinking to yourself, well, I could have just looked at this real quick and said, well, I know what the minimum is just by taking a quick look. But if there were 10,000 values here, it might take a while to find that number. And so this is just a quick way to do that. And so the same thing for max. Let's go ahead and type in equals max. And this time I'm just going to type it in for fun. Instead of highlighting them, I'll click D6 colon D17, and that goes ahead and selects all of those numbers for me. Close my parentheses and hit enter. And so now we have our minimum and our maximum. And then to do our range, there's probably more than one way to do it, but at least the way that seems the most obvious to me is just say equals, and then I'm going to say I want to take the maximum value, which is what, H15, and I want to subtract what is that, 13, so we can type in H13. And you might notice what I did there was I didn't actually type H15, I selected it. And so let me actually hit Control Z and show that again. So I typed in equals, and then I selected the value, the cell that I wanted to use. And so it automatically typed H15 for me. And then I hit minus, and then I typed in the 1, 2 above it, which is clearly H13. Or I could have just clicked on that one as well, but you can see both are highlighted because I'm using both in my equation. I hit enter, and it goes ahead and gives me the range of values from the maximum number to our minimum number. So again, just some more cool tricks that you can do with Excel. But from here, let's go ahead and change our precision of these values. So let's highlight them all. Let's right click and go to Format Cells and change the number to 3 decimal places. So all of them should change to 3 decimal places for us, which is nice because, for example, our range changes a little bit at 3 decimals, and it goes ahead and rounds off our standard deviation, so it's not such a long decimal. And it just in general makes everything look a little bit nice and neat, having a consistent precision for your statistics values. But from there, let's keep on rocking and rolling. Let's go ahead and find our value. Just skip a few below range and type in our bin values. And all bin values are a range of values that we'll use for our histogram that we are about to create. Hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. But I'm going to give myself a list of values for my histogram. And so I'm going to go ahead and type in what I assume is going to be the smallest possible value. If you look, my smallest value is 4.75. So just to play it safe, I'll type in one number lower. I'm going to type in 4.5, and I'm going to go up by quarters. So after 4.5 would be 4.75, and above that would be 5, and above that would be 5.25, and then 5.5, and then 5.75, and again you can see I'm just going up by quarters, and this will just be my range of values for my histogram that we're about to build for ourselves. So next is 6, and then 6.25, and then 6.5, and hopefully you don't have any values bigger than 6.5, but if you do, you can just go to 6.75 if you have someone in the class that was taller than 6'6", or well, as you'll see, it won't really matter. We'll just have an extra value there that says it's in the 6.5 or higher range. You'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. But let's go ahead and give these a consistent precision as well. Let's highlight them all, go to Format Cells, click on Number, and let's change it to 3 decimals as well. And then let's use these numbers to create a histogram. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Data, we're going to go to Data Analysis, and let's click on Histogram and hit OK. And the first thing it wants to know is, well, what is our input range? And our input range should be our D6 to our D17. And then it wants to know, well, what is our bin range? And so to select that, let's go ahead and let's highlight those values, and let's change this to these numbers. These will be our bin range of values. And then the next thing it wants to know is what's going to be our output range. And so we're going to go ahead and click output range, and we'll change this value to, and let's just move it like 2 or 3 squares or 2 or 3 cells to the right of the term bin for ourselves. And let's put the output range here. And then most importantly, make sure you have chart output selected. And once you have all of these things, once yours looks exactly like mine, go ahead and hit OK. And you should get a bin and a histogram. And what this does is it tells you all of your values that fall within these ranges in our histogram. So for example, if you look, we see 5.5. It says there are frequency of 3. And what that means is everything above 5.25, so 5.251, and anything smaller than 5.5 or equal to 5.5 would fall into this range right here, these 3 values for 5.5. And so what are those? Well, we got 5.33, which is a little bit bigger than 5.25, and then we got 2 5.5 measurements. And so those are the 3 measurements that represents that frequency of 3, just to give you an idea of what our histogram is. And so next we can actually go ahead and format our histogram. So if we click on it, you can see what values are showing up to create our histogram. Let's go ahead and click on our X values down here, and let's right click and go to format the axis. And then let's look at our different tabs here, and let's find our size and properties tab and open this up. And let's mess with the angle of these values here. Instead of it being straight up and down, let's go ahead and give it an angle. We can change it. We can change it to 1 degree if we want to. You can see that turns it sideways. We can make it, or almost sideways. It's almost perfectly horizontal. It's 1 degree off the horizontal. We can change it to 0 degrees, and then it looks a little bit better. I'm going to change it to -60, turning them sideways a little bit. I just like the way that looks, and you can go ahead and make yours look like that as well. You can see how they all line up. And then we can keep formatting this. We can go ahead and with our format window open, let's go ahead and click on these bars themselves. And let's change the gap width of these values. We can change this from 150% gap width to just 5%, which should make this whole thing a lot wider. And then we can click off, and we can actually, let me go ahead and close this out. We can reopen it in a second if we need to. But I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit wider, a little bit bigger, so it's nicer to see. But you can see what happened was is I made the gap width in between my bars just a little bit thinner. It's only at 5%, just to make it look a little bit nicer, or at least in my opinion, a little bit nicer. But the point is, as you can see, you can change how your histogram looks. You can play around with it to make the data look the way you want it to make it a little bit more presentable. And then we can change some other things. Let's go ahead and click on these y-axis numbers, and let's right click after we click on it, and let's go down to add major grid lines, which just adds some lines for ourselves. And what if we wanted more grid lines than that? Then what we can do is we can right click on it and go down to format our y-axis, and we can make sure we have our axis options tab open, and we can make sure our major units, instead of being 1, we could change it to 0.5, which would give us, if you look, more grid lines because, well, it gives us more values. It's going up by every half instead of every whole. And again, this is just to show you that you can play around with the histogram and format it the way you want. And so let's go ahead and get rid of this formatting window, and let's make this thing just a little bit bigger so we can see what's going on, and we can move it around a little bit. And let's actually change that term bin. Let's click on that, and let's change this to height, and then let's say height in feet. And so let's make that capital feet here. And you can see we have a nice representation of our measurements over here in decimal feet as a histogram. And we have a nice representation of our statistics here. And actually go ahead and highlight these values here from mean to range. Let me show you one more cool trick that we can do here. So once you've highlighted these, go ahead and go back to data and click on data analysis. And this time, instead of clicking histogram, let's go ahead and go to descriptive statistics and hit OK. And this window should pop up, and it wants to know what our input range is. And this time let's go ahead and select these D column values, but make sure you actually highlight decimal feet as well as all of your other decimal feet values. But make sure again you get the actual column header in your values. And then make sure labels in first row is selected and summary statistics is selected as well. Make sure both of those are checked off. And then for our output range, let's go ahead and move it over here above our histogram. Let's go a little bit further off to the right. I don't know, we'll go ahead and select N2 for our output range and hit OK. And you'll notice it automatically calculated the mean, the standard deviation, the median, the mode, and a few other statistics values that might help you, you might find interesting in your career in the future. And it gives us the minimum, the maximum, the sum, the count of measurements that we had. And I'm going to go ahead and make my N column a little bit wider so we can read all of these values, make sure we can read them all. And then the last thing I want you to do is actually change the term decimal feet. Let's change that to just column 1. And so what was the point of this? Well, it's just another way to get all of your values that you need for your statistics. Just a cool little quick way to get these values that you might want. But that's essentially the basics of Excel.